trying to force fit them in the way that we work today, when perhaps in 5 to 8 years we might actually need to think about a new way of working or a different way of working. Offices will become mobile hubs. Little need for expensive offices, a big agreement to that as well. You know, you can see there is a rise in many, many countries of hub centres where you can go in, or coffeeces, as they're called, coffee shops which are masquerading as offices. Starbucks, you know who I'm talking about, you know. I mean, how many times I've been in because I travel so much as well, that's exactly what I do, you know. So I don't go and hire an expensive Regis office or something. I go to Starbucks, or I go to one of these Synergy hub sites where a lot of people like me can kind of go in there, pay very little money, actually socialize as well, and be quite stimulated in that environment. I don't need an office anymore. Either that or a plane, you know, it's fine. Final one, leader and manager readiness. This was an interesting one because we talked about, so for Generation Y, the survey asked, you know, well, you know, the Generation Y have been accused of being the me generation. It's all about me. It's where the selfie was born, you know, this is the generation with the selfie. They're going to have to leave that behind because they're stepping up to management and leadership. And, you know, kind of 8 out of 10 immediately said, yeah, absolutely the case. But when we went into this, we kind of did ask the question, and it raised the question, are we being unfair? We are generalizing hugely a whole generation here, and I have a bit of a problem with that because it's not true in general. There are traits for sure, but I think, you know, when you see some of the newer organizations coming up, some of the disruptors, then, you know, there's a lot of Generation Y who's driving that as well. So we've got to kind of remove, I think, some bias out of this. You know, and that's another one of those that kind of goes back to the other survey set that we did. But, you know, I think the challenge for Generation Y, they're going to get a shock when Generation Z come into the workplace, and they're going to have to think about it. You know, how do we enable leaders and managers with the right and appropriate technologies, not just to manage who we've got in the organization, but this tech-savvy individual kind of set of Generation Z coming in. Now, it's interesting. We did a second survey on this. On Generation Z. It was a school careers fair, actually, but we just took an iPad, we did a Survey Monkey, and we did some plans. And one of the most startling pieces of insight that we got is that, how do you want to work in the future? Do you want to use technology? And 8 out of 10 of Gen Z said, no, we want to collaborate and work with humans. Thank you very much. And we kind of took a step back saying, what do you mean? No, you're going to use technology because we expect you to. That's what all the press is saying. But actually, it goes back to what I said before. Think about the education system. Then technology is the means to an end, not the end itself. But it's the collaboration which is really making their learning and application of learning tick at the moment. And that's what they're expecting in the workplace. And in fact, they want more human interaction. So there's a bit of a, you know, there's a bit of a paradox there, I think. Generation X leaders in waiting are not prepared. So in general, let's say, Generation X, you know, kind of stepping up in many organizations to being the leaders as we kind of cross over into the 2020s workplace. And we're saying they're not ready. Well, there's a broad disagreement with that. Just over half saying, no, we think they're ready. The very interesting thing about Generation X, though, is that we did another survey on them, and Generation X came back and said, you know, we don't feel ready. In fact, in our survey, they were the least confident generation out there. And yet, to everybody else who answered in the survey, they appear to be the most competent and the best to take over organizations because they've kind of got a broad view up the line, down the generational gap here. They're kind of comfortable with technology. But Generation X are not confident and they're not being invested in. So let's go to another pigeonhole before we close this off, shall we? So consider your own organizations. Okay. So if you go back to the question page, and if you go down to the question that says, in the context of the 4th Industrial Revolution, how prepared would you say your leaders and managers are in your organization right now? Go to that question and cast your vote, please, and let's see. So it's interesting, the top 2 here are, they're not prepared at all, somewhat prepared. So I think what most people in this room are saying is that we've got a challenge ahead of us for our leaders and managers in the organizations represented in this room. We need to do something that prepares them, not just for now, because we may have actually missed developing them right now, but also for the future, for some of the things that we've been talking about, because they're going to have to cope with a lot more change in this shifting 2020s when we're moving forward. So, and that's not just you saying that, that is your kind of peers in this room as well. Which is a broad agreement that we have to get hold of this. One of the problems is that, with budgets drying up since kind of 2011 and so, or before 2008, it's been so many years now, hasn't it? Is that, many organizations, we can be guilty if we've promoted people early because they've been great in their operational role. But it doesn't mean that they're great managers, and it doesn't mean they're great leaders. And if we don't give them those fundamental skills, how on earth can we go and look ahead for the future and think, well, how do we go beyond that? Because if they can't manage anyway, then what good are they for the future? So we've got quite a bit to do from that. So to start the journey, we can give you something to help at least. At the very least, this white paper with the survey results, but as I said, we did kind of an activity, we did an event not dissimilar to this, where we actually brought out, though, from the experts there, all the best practice, suggested next steps, some out-of-the-box thinking, which we will provide for you. So there will be some kind of steps that you can take in all of these moving forward. And I think, the secret is to that, is that don't be overwhelmed by this great big future, because it's about what are the steps, the small steps that we can take now, which are going to take us down that road. Some organizations are doing this in a really serious way. Now, this guy is a guy called Mark Levy, who has just taken over kind of the HR function of Airbnb. But they don't call it the HR function in Airbnb anymore. They call it employee experience function. And this is, if any of you have been on the website, the Future Workplace website, we're starting to see more and more workplace and employee experience kind of taking hold instead of the traditional way of managing our human capital. And that is kind of blurring and mixing things like, for our employees, how do we engage them on an intellectual level, aspirational level, physical, digital, lots and lots of different things that we can do to do that, so that we can forge collaboration and engage them at a much deeper level in the organization. And Mark's role here is to connect everything to do with workplace as an experience. So no matter what the business is and whatever sector it's in, is what does that experience look like for our employees? What's the brand that we want to create to attract employees, first of all, and retain them in the organization for longer, and have a really engaged set of employees who can self-start and actually generate a lot of the results from kind of right across the business, rather than from a hierarchical point of view. And the organizations that are able to do this are only able to do it because it's sponsored by the very top of the organization. And that's the absolute key in this. So, with messages that we've shared today, perhaps it's time to go back to the leadership of some of our organizations, share some of this organization. You're going to get a copy of it, some of this presentation. You're going to get a copy of it. Feel free to use it, and have those discussions and start talking about what do we need to do differently in the next few years. So, perhaps we can do one final poll for you. If you go back to the pigeonhole, okay? And consider yourselves in your role and the role of kind of, HR, L&D, employee experience, if there is anybody who's leading that role there. And if you go in and answer this poll question, please. So the one below that we were just at. So this is about the leadership of this agenda through HR, L&OD. Well, great. Isn't it great to end on a positive like this? So we're starting to make progress. So great sentiment in this room that we are starting to make progress in this area in terms of HR, L&OD really owning this agenda. Now, if you can think about, if you can own this and have this discussion with your own organization, the future, what it looks like, what does employee experience look like, this puts HR and OD at the heart of future strategy, right at the commercial and operational heart of the business. And I think it's a great message to take away. So thank you very much indeed for your patience in going through all of this that we went through. I hope that's been interesting and insightful for you. I'm around for questions and so on, but don't forget you can go to the Q&A bit within Pigeonhole, log any questions that you have, and I promise you that if we don't get to them today, we'll answer them afterwards. Thank you very much indeed.
We would like to talk about all of these challenging and stark realities that Jeremy has talked to us about. We probably have time for maybe a couple of them and no more. So I took the liberty of selecting or pre-selecting a couple of those drivers. And we'll invite our panelists to talk about them, react to them, and at some appropriate time permitting, we'll probably open up the floor as well. All right. So we'd like to begin by talking about driver number 2. And this is the broadening cross-generational environment or challenges. So this is IBPAP. So presumably we are daily confronted by quickly expanding workforces that consist of diverse, multiple generations. And these individuals and teams also adopt, are influenced by, or drive different and varying perspectives, opinions, evolving mindsets, and perhaps a different work ethic across multiple generations. Is this challenging the workplace? I'll leave that up to you to respond to. Is this a hard reality now? If we all believe what Jeremy presented, probably yes. But we will now turn to our panelists. What we would like them to talk about briefly is to describe the dominant challenge or challenges you face in managing such a cross-generational workforce. And if possible, also talk about what are some of your successful strategies in overcoming these cross-generational workforces in your respective environments.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, in the case of Meralco, I think the existence of a multi-generational workforce is very true for us. In our case, in terms of our employee population, I would say that 50% now of Meralco employees are composed of millennials, and roughly 50% are from the Generation X. And a very, very small percentage, probably I belong to that group. I hate to admit it, but I'm part of the almost, I'm in the borderline of the baby boomer. I gave away my age. So in terms of challenge, because when you're in HR, well, you really have to also be considerate of cost. So the problem that we are experiencing now, of course, these two sets of employees coming from two different generations will have totally different needs and expectations insofar as engagement is concerned. So the problem for us is how to come up with programs so that we can also, save effort on the part of HR and save on costs. Are programs that will appeal to both. Yeah. So that is one of the challenges. The second one is, since Meralco is a company that is highly unionized, so we have two sets of union. Much as we want to challenge or to probably modify our current for example, compensation and benefit package, sometimes our hands are tied because many of these compensation and benefit packages are linked with our collective bargaining agreement. So that is the challenge. And then probably this the last thing that I'm going to say, in terms of another serious challenge that for me as also Head of Learning and Development is the way I look at it, even in the surveys that we get, the millennials or the Gen Y, they like the style that they expect from their supervisors. They want to be coached. They want to be mentored. But I don't think the current set of our leaders, I don't know if I'm sure they don't have the way we look at the profile of our supervisors. one, they don't have the capability to do that. Second, they grew up also in an environment where they were never coached, so they don't see the value yet of coaching and mentoring people. And then, of course, we are still in that situation where supervisors are measured in terms of organizational outputs, not in terms of the effort that they exert in developing people. So they're not measured in that aspect yet. So that aggravates the situation.
That's a mouthful, Rita.
That's all I will say for this afternoon.
Right. And you leave us with a lot of thought for maybe another several hours to talk about it. Thank you very much. I wonder if Penny would like to either add on to that challenge as she sees it from where she sits or where she used to sit in various lifetimes, or would like to respond to that.
Yeah, I have to say this. Jude also came from the industry. Some of you may know that I was with Convergys, right? Before I joined IBPAP, I was Convergys Philippines employee number 1 in the country. He was number 5.
Number 9.
Number 9, sorry. So he also came from the industry. And he was the first retiree of Convergys, 5 years vesting.
I was executed much later.
So he's ex-con. Anyway, yeah, we call ourselves ex-cons. Anyway, I think this question is really not for me to answer, it's for you. Because you know very well that many of our workforce, a big percentage of our workforce are really millennials. And we continue to hire about 200,000 a year based on the IBPAP, IT-BPM roadmap. And Kenneth will announce it later, that we're undergoing our new roadmap. So the challenge for us is, how do we really deal with the millennials? And when I cannot answer that at the moment, but I tell you that we're coming up with a research on that, because we asked you sometime in February what kind of research study you want from IBPAP. And the number 1 item in the request for research is, Kenneth? Employee engagement. How do you engage the millennials? So I cannot answer that at the moment. I'll let you answer that later. But we're gathering those best practices, in fact. And we are challenged as well, similar to Meralco. We might not have that big percent of Gen X and baby boomers, but we definitely have the same challenge when it comes to coaching and leadership and being able to mentor our people.
Thank you, Penny. Jeremy, over to you. It's very interesting because in so many words, I believe Penny has really expounded on some of the challenges that Rita has also spoken about, certainly along similar lines. Jeremy, you've worked with multiple industries, across multiple companies, across multiple geographies. I mean, it's evident on the basis of your presentation about what you've seen, what you see is going to happen. And perhaps even today, we are in the midst of the future. We are in the future. And so what is really the future? So we'd like to hear from you, Jeremy, in terms of what you've seen across your client companies, your partners, in collaboration with them. What solutions successfully have been implemented across this space, given these challenges?
That's a big question. That's a big question. It's interesting to hear both Rita and Penny around the themes of engagement and around the themes of the mutual coaching, if you like, from what's happening with our leaders and managers, and are they capable of even coaching at times? I think we think. I go back to the research that we did. The first thing I would like to say is that I do believe that many organizations and many individuals, in the positions that we are in here, probably a bit hard on ourselves, because we've done, we have made progress in how we're managing the Gen Y millennial mix and doing it much better and bringing them into the organization. And I kind of pick up one point from our Gen Z survey, which is very true with Gen Y millennials as well, which is the requirement or the need for collaboration. One of the primary engagement strategies that we're seeing is around collaboration and being involved. I want to be involved. I feel that I can add value, but in some organizations, I'm not allowed to. I'm told I'm too junior or I'm too this and so on. However, I think probably the best example I can give is what Citibank are doing now, but introduced about 2 years ago, and I thought was really innovative at the time. It had untold benefits, in fact. And they introduced something called reverse mentoring. And their reverse mentoring approach was to use the power within Gen Y and millennials. First of all, in terms of their understanding of technology, social media, and how that can be used internally in the organization and then externally with clients. So what they did, to cut a long story short, because I don't have time for the whole story, is that they essentially brought Gen Y millennials into the boardroom. And they brought it at senior manager, senior leader level, with individual and group sessions based on pieces of technology, how to get, simple things like getting the best out of your mobile device, but ideas generating as well about what can we do as an organization to create more community, collaboration internally, and what can we do externally with customers so that we have competitive advantage. And they had great ideas. And in fact, the final thing I'll say, it had another benefit that they weren't expecting, which is much to the challenge that you were talking about, Rita, was that it was a real encouragement for the senior levels who were in there to also provide some coaching and mentoring back as a return and to get in, because they created a relationship. So it actually had the impact of not flattening completely, but kind of bringing the levels closer together, removing some of the hierarchical barriers, and actually making a collaborative, almost community in its own right, which benefited both parties, in fact.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We certainly would like to hear more about that, Jeremy, if we could. Unfortunately, we don't have as much time, and maybe after the end of the event, if you're around and some people would like to stay, there might be an opportunity to ask more about the implementation of that reverse mentoring approach. I need to just very quickly move on to the second question, which, however, or I should say, interestingly enough, dovetails into some of your own comments on the first driver. The second driver is actually leader and manager readiness. So Rita has spoken about the challenge in her workplace. Penny has spoken about it, but has very quickly and really dodged it and said, you're going to answer that, right? And Jeremy has spoken a little bit about what he has seen in the space of Citibank. I don't want to put Rita on the spot, but you did talk about that challenge, and we'll be still interested to hear what kind of work in progress or what kind of successful strategies or interventions have you done in the HR and learning space when you look at, yes, we are confronted with the reality that as our workforce grows, and it's composed predominantly of millennials and Generation Y, and we need to raise leaders, but we need to get them ready. Ready or not, they need to get ready. Would you comment about that, Rita?
Well, there are two approaches that we plan, and we have started doing. One is to require the supervisors to coach. And how we're going to do that, we have recently launched Success Factor, and through that information system, we will be able to track down supervisors who are coaching and who are not coaching. So that's one, because unless you are able to monitor them and rate them based on whether they are performing that role or not, we will not be able to gain traction. The second intervention is, we still have to really implement this, but we have started a coaching program for we call them our energy talents. These are the high potential engineers. So we are tapping internal coaches. So these are the experts in electrical engineering who we are tapping to act as coaches to our young engineers. So we're going to try out. So we just recently got the approval to roll it out. But in terms of coverage, I think from a scale from 100%, I think we're only covering 10% of the population.
Okay.
So that's the initial salvo, initial step that we're doing.
Can we hold our breath until we find out the results of your experiment?
Give me a year.
We'll invite you next year. Thank you very much, Rita. Penny, would you like to comment?
That one, I have a program. IBPAP, for some of you, you may know this, we have a Leadership Development Council. So if you're not part of that, you might want to volunteer. It's by volunteer. It's either you volunteer or you get voluntold, right? Told to volunteer. And we came up with our first team leader benchmarking study with HR Avatar. So we had 787, yes, Paige is saying yes. 787 team leaders assessed across many companies, J&J being one, Cytel, and we had some other companies joining that assessment. And now we have already seen what are the competencies that we need for a team leader. What we have done now is we are looking at programs that we can implement to be able to help our team leaders grow. Because as you know, in this industry, after the agents is the team leaders. And sometimes we promote them when they're not ready. The best agents are not the best TLs. So we need to still look at like coaching. How do we teach our team leaders how to coach? Because many of the agents leave because of their boss. So IBPAP and NCCAP, we're both working together on a team leader development program.
Thank you very much, Penny. Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to hold off your comment, and I'm going to do something different now. And I know Penny earlier said we'd like to hear from the floor. So maybe one or two participants off the floor, and I'll just get this microphone and I'll hand it over to Benji. So we've talked about an expanding workforce, and we would like to believe that predominantly around the room, a lot of you are experiencing this as part of your daily fare. And so as you grow your workforce, you're handling, confronting, daily encountering, and maybe struggling with that multi-generational workforce. That's one. And second, to our driver number 5, is how are you getting people ready to assume leadership, provide coaching, provide mentoring. So you now have a generation Y who now needs to manage to metrics of anywhere between 10 to 12 to 20 people. Particularly a profiled individual who is probably much more an individual contributor, not necessarily a general statement, but maybe a lot, maybe some. To your point, Penny, a successful and high-performing, consistently high-performing agent is now tasked to manage 6 to 12 to 20 people. So now they're responsible for metrics as well. So I open it up to the floor. Feel free to comment on how are you managing a multi-generational workforce, or how are you getting your people to be ready, or how are you getting them ready to manage such a workforce? Anyone, please. 1 or 2 people. I think we have maybe a couple of minutes per person. Anyone would like to share their best practices or their pain?
I actually had a question, but maybe I'll just comment to June's statement. I think for J&J, we are a very traditional company, and with the advent of our shared service